we have two magnificent hosts, Morgan and Aaron Peterer. I'll introduce them more fully once I've just had a few words of welcome to everybody else. I'm so excited to be in the place to say welcome to my colleagues in Cape Town and Johannesburg at the Cape Town Holocaust and Genocide Centre, and obviously in Johannesburg at the Johannesburg Holocaust and Genocide Centre. It's very special for us to welcome you and all of you to this lovely afternoon with the Anne Frank House. I should say with and in the Anne Frank House. A very special guest is Myra Osborne. Myra's with us a lot and working with us closely on a number of projects, but the Anne Frank story and the Anne Frank House is a particularly Myra domain. When we first started at the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre, Myra had a long-established relationship with the Anne Frank House, in particular with Jan-Erik Dubbelman, who is going to be joining us at some point. And I don't know. He's there, Jan-Erik. There you are. Very special to have Jan-Erik, who runs the international department at the Anne Frank House. And Myra and Jan-Erik have the really close friendships going back to Myra's instrumental in running of the Anne Frank in the World exhibition back in 1994. So their relationship goes all the way back to that. And through Myra, we inherited these very special friends. And as a result, the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre has a unique Anne Frank space and a reproduction of her room in our exhibition, which is, as I say, a unique and very special feature of our permanent exhibition. So it is fabulous for us to all be together in this unusual format, but something we're all getting used to. I'm delighted to welcome so many of the guides and volunteers from the Durban Holocaust and Genocide Centre who are intimately connected with our space. Thank you to all of you for coming. Thank you, Myra, and thank you, Jan-Erik, for making this possible. Then to introduce, of course, Aaron and Morgan. So Aaron Peterer is a very familiar face to many of us. Aaron started working at the Anne Frank House in 2002, but in 2008, he actually came to Durban for the opening of our centre. And that began a journey where for a number of years, from 2009 to 2012 almost, Aaron was involved in organizing the Anne Frank History for Today exhibition school tour, 20 schools around the country. So many of you in Johannesburg and Cape Town and Durban will have remembered Aaron and the work that he did in the schools in our areas. And he co-conceptualized the Free to Choose, Create and Memory Walk film workshops, where students all across the globe, in cooperation with partner organizations, are able to debate films on human rights issues and memorialization. Much more than Aaron's technical and academic prowess, he has a degree in comparative arts and media studies, but much more than that is his friendship with all of us and his commitment and care and interest in South Africa. Aaron's mum is of South African heritage. His granddad was born in Durban. So Aaron belongs to us, and we're absolutely thrilled that he was so willing and enthusiastic about hosting this webinar. He introduced us to his wonderful colleague, Morgan. And as I mentioned earlier, Morgan Bailey lives in South Carolina. She first volunteered at the Anne Frank House as an undergrad at the University of Southern California in 2012. She's gone on to earn a master's degree in education and has come all the way back from education to combining her skills in education with the story of Anne Frank. And she is now conducting training, obviously physically, but now virtually in California, Alaska, Nebraska, throughout South Carolina, around the story of Anne Frank and the lessons of this amazing story and diary and artifact. So I'm not going to formally introduce Jan-Erik in terms of he's here as the big boss and the main friend, but delighted to have all of you, and I'm going to ask Morgan and Aaron if you'd please begin.
All right. Well, thank you, Claudia and Mary, for your kind introduction. This is, you know, a great honor for me to be here together with you. Morgan and I, we've done lots of webinars already, but I see so many familiar faces. It feels like, you know, talking to friends and family who have been with me for such a long time. And I'm really happy that we can have this experience together with you. Obviously, Myra is here, who started it all, basically, the connection the Anne Frank House has with South Africa. So Myra coordinated our exhibition there in the early 1990s, 1994. And when we basically kind of like, found our corporation again in the early 2000s, Myra was also there. So thank you so much. It's a great honor, Myra, to have you here as a participant. And you know, and there's Mary, of course. There's Tali, there's Maureen, there's Janine, whom I've all been working with for so many years. So it's really great to be here together with you. And I had the honor, you know, to visit Cape Town, Durban, and Joburg many times. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank all of the tour guides, volunteers, for your hard work and dedication in the census. This is really important. You know, now we're using this Zoom and a virtual tour, but still, you know, especially in Holocaust education, when we work with young people, the personal contact, the face-to-face work is so important. So thank you so much for your dedication, and of course participation in this webinar today. Yeah. Morgan, would you like to say hello to our friends?
Well, I would. And so, you know, I'm so excited to be here with all of you. And I have not been to South Africa before, but it is very high on my list. So I think that this experience just makes it a professional necessity. And so I'm just going to have to find a way to make it happen, because we're all colleagues now. And so I'm very happy to get to call you all my colleagues and my friends now. And I'm very much looking forward to our time together.
Thank you, Morgan. All right, so today we will take all of you on a tour through the virtual version of the Secret Annex in the Anne Frank House. And as we know that all of you are also working with young people, you're taking learners through the exhibition, we will put in some of our educational activities as we go through. We would like to ask for your participation. By all means, if you have questions, we always have time to answer questions. And we hope to make this very interactive and very interesting for you, so that maybe one day you can also use this educational source on one of your tours in the near future. So to begin with, we would like to start with a poll. And this is also something that we would do with learners in a workshop setting. And I will launch the poll right now. The question is, have you ever read Anne Frank's diary? And there are three options to answer. There's yes, partially, so parts of it, or you have not read it yet.
Aaron, I don't think the poll's launched yet.
Oh, it is.
Sorry, maybe it's just me.
No worries.
I submitted my answer.
Perfect. So we have about 90% of people who have already answered, 92. And well, we can already see a trend. So 46 answers, 78% have read Anne Frank's diary, 17% have read parts of it, and 5% have not read it yet. So maybe in the near future, you will have time or find inspiration to read it. I just wanted to ask, can you see the poll or can you not see the poll?
Nope.
No? Okay, then I'll quickly try if I can. So now you might see the answers to that poll. Is that all right? Yeah?
Nope.
Nope?
Nope.
Oh.
We
We
see
see
the
the
landing.
launch.
Okay.
Yeah, we see
Okay.
the launch page of the virtual hiding place.
Still, overwhelming majority of you has read Anne Frank's diary. So thank you for that.
Ah, now we can see it.
Now you can see it.
Now we
All
can-
right, perfect.
Very good.
Yeah,
What a great group.
definitely. Okay, I will stop sharing the results now. And now, my next question, and I would please like to ask you to type in your messages in the chat function. Type in your answers in the chat function. Now, if there's one thing that comes to your mind when you think about Anne Frank, what would that be? There's one thing that comes to your mind. So please use the chat function and let us know what comes to your mind. Bravery, resilience, hope.
Some courage.
The tragedy of her dying so close to the camp being liberated, indeed, just a few weeks before the liberation.
A typical teenager, yes.
Sure. Yeah. Sadness, courage and intelligence, definitely. Strength for survival, inspiration.
Cheers, Flo. Thank you.
Maturity. So this is also one of our activities when we start in our workshops, where we train young people to become peer guides for the Anne Frank exhibition. In our workshop, we would have a large flip chart sheet in the center of a room, all the students and learners sitting around the circle, and everybody would just receive a marker and write his or her thoughts on that sheet of paper. And on the second day of the training, we would repeat this activity, and students for themselves can actually see how much they have learned, you know, about Anne Frank in those 2 days of peer guide training.
And visually, often what we will do is the first day, we'll have students write what they know in a particular color. So the whole poster is made up of one color. And then on day 2, when we have them add what they've learned, we have them pick a different color. So they have this visual where they can see over the course of 2 days just how much they've learned.
Okay, well, thank you very much for all your comments. And before we start to have a look to see the actual hiding place, I would like to ask you to have a look at this image here. Now, for the ones of you who have been to Amsterdam, who have visited the Anne Frank house, this is the Jordaan quarter, Jordan, with the Westerkerk. And you can see in this highlight color the actual Anne Frank house. And today, the museum entrance is in one of these buildings. Obviously, the facade, the buildings inside have changed dramatically, have been adapted over the years. And today you would walk into this space and explore different rooms. At some stage, you would actually enter Prinsengracht number 263, the front house and the back house, the actual hiding place of Anne Frank and the other 7 people in hiding. This here canal, the Prinsengracht, and over here, this canal, the Keizersgracht. And we have the Westerkerk Wester Church and the Wester Toren here with the bells, you know, that were also playing every 15 minutes when Anne Frank, her family, and the other people were in hiding. And at first, you can imagine, Anne Frank and her family didn't really, you know, experience this, so they had to get used to these bells first. Okay.
And if I can add something there as well, oftentimes students don't understand how it was possible that so many people could be hiding in the middle of a city in, you know, what seems like the wide open broad daylight. And they think, well, if there's a building they're hiding in, people could see that, right? How could they not know they were there? And so, especially in South Carolina, we don't see a lot of these kinds of buildings where they're built like row houses, right? Where the building is touching the other. So the reference I often use with students is, have you seen the show Full House or Fuller House now, right? And in the beginning, it shows these houses that are all connected to one another. And so then they have this reference, right, of what it would look like. And I say, if you can't see the sides of a building, then you have no depth perception for how far back the building should go. So when you walk in this building, you have no reason to believe that there's anything beyond where your experience in the building stops, right? As opposed to if I walked up to someone's home that's a freestanding building and I kind of see their house from the outside, I have an idea of how big it is and how far back it would go. And then I might say, something's a little off. I feel like there's a part of the house I'm not being exposed to. But because of the architecture here, you can see how it was possible that people could walk by this building all the time and never know that there was this additional part in the back of the house. And I think this image really, really shows that.
So actually, the house of Prinsengracht number 263 was built in the golden age, you know, of the Netherlands. We're talking about the early 17th century. And people in Amsterdam were taxed on the width of their houses, meaning that, you know, even wealthy merchants had to build very narrow houses, as you can see here. And for additional space, they would build kind of like an area walk behind there that brings light in and add another house at the back. So in Amsterdam, we have lots of places with a front house and a back house. Here in this image, you can also see the actual chestnut tree that Anne Frank is writing about in her diary, which was a symbol of hope for her back then and still continues to be a symbol of hope all over the world. We will get to this a little bit later. For now, I would like to take you to this first part here, which is the landing, as we call it. And this is already in the, this is already going towards the back of the house, so towards the Secret Annex. Now you might recognize this bookcase here, which was not there originally, but this bookcase was actually built by the helpers, and it concealed the secret the door to the actual annex. Yeah? So if you were to walk up the staircase, this one here, and you would end up here, you would not say that there's another house behind there, because these windows, you know, were blocked. This would be the route back into the front house, actually, to the offices of Anne Frank's father's company. Just some boxes, some cases, storage, and up here, a map of the Kingdom of Belgium to cover the top part of the door. Today, there's a glass plate on here, so you cannot actually walk through here, but the museum route takes you through this door, and finally, it will take you through the secret revolving bookcase to the actual annex in the back of the house. And Morgan will take over from here.
All right, can everybody see my screen? Okay, so this is the first room that you come into from the Secret Annex. Now I am going to walk back out here to give you an idea of what it would look like when you first enter in through the room Aaron was just in, right? So this would be that door behind the bookcase, and you end up on this landing. Whoops. Right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take us on this first level of the hiding place. And here we have Otto, Edith, and Margo's room. Now, something that I think is interesting about this room is that it was originally intended to only be Otto and Edith's room. And by the way, we want to give you the time and space to ask questions. And so if at any point you think of something, feel free to drop it in the chat box for us. We're going to try to engage with you guys at various points. And so feel free to add your thoughts and your questions while we're going. So like I said, this was initially only supposed to be Otto and Edith's room. The idea was for Margo and Anne to share a room next to them. And what ended up happening was there was an additional person who came into hiding with them. So initially there was the Frank family, and there was also the Van Pel's family. And then what happened was there was another person who ended up being added into the hiding space. And so they had to move around a little bit to make some extra space. And so when they did that, Margo ended up moving in here with her parents. Now, in this space, you can see several things, including books on the table. You can see here prayer books that belonged to Edith. And something that I think is interesting when we think about what was physically in this space is that they had so few opportunities to bring anything with them. And so every single thing that I see in this space, I can't help but think was very intentional, and it must have meant a lot to the people who decided to bring it. So to Edith, religion, her faith, her prayers are very important to her, so she brought these prayer books. Now, something really important to keep in mind when you see this space is that this is a really unique view that we get to have right now. And the main reason for that is that if you were to go to Amsterdam right now and go into the Anne Frank house, you would not see any of this furniture. The current museum is completely empty of all furniture for a few reasons, but primarily because it's what Otto Frank requested. And that request has been honored to this day. He wanted the space to be left empty the way that he found it when he came back after the war. And so when you walk in this space today, you're able to come in the door and walk around the room, essentially in a single file line with others, much less people now with the current social distancing measures in place. But you're able to walk around the room, look at the walls, but this furniture isn't here. And so this gives us a really interesting look into what it was truly like to be in this space. Now, that said, I want to pose a question for you that you can either respond to in the chat, or if you are comfortable and you would like to raise your hand via the little responses at the bottom, you can do that, and then Claudia can unmute you and you can share. But my question for you is, what do you think, what are your thoughts around this idea of the space being empty today? What do you think the impact of this is on the experience that you would have when you come into the space? And if there are any responses in the chat, maybe Aaron or Claudia can read those out because I can't see them on my share.
Okay.
Sure.
I have one comment says loss. Another one, it reinforces the sense of loss. I'm feeling that everyone has been taken away. That's the feeling back then. Everyone gone and sense of their loss. So yes, Morgan, would you like to reiterate on that? What the decision was, why to keep it empty?
Absolutely. And that is really one way to put it. That's really what it is. When Otto came back and he walked into this space that was so empty, it was after the war, and so he knew that life was going to move on for so many people as people try to figure out what is it going to look like for us to try to get back to some sense of normalcy. And so he knew that the rest of the world was going to, in a sense, move on. And so he wanted to make sure that this space could be a place of remembrance, so that when people enter this space, they get transported back to this moment in time where he walked in and he saw this space and the impact that it had to see the last place that he was able to live with some semblance of freedom. Of course, we know they didn't truly have any freedom, but they were able to be together as a family and share meals together and sleep in warm beds. And so he wanted to honor that moment in time and kind of press pause. Now, something else I want to show you here, and then maybe we have a few more. Just quickly here, on the walls, these are my favorite things in the annex. I think it's the most moving places that you see here. And it's because what's on the walls here is actually still on the walls. So like I said, the furniture is not there, but the wall pieces are. And so here, you can see this map of Normandy. This is where Otto Frank would track the advancement of the Allied troops in hopes that they would come sooner rather than later. And you can still see this map on the wall with the same pins that he placed when he had these hopes. And then the second thing here, you can actually see where Edith and Otto tracked the growth of their girls while they were in hiding. You can see the pencil marks, and I don't know why that is so moving to me, maybe because my parents still live in the house that I grew up in, and so I can see things like this that are similar, and I had these experiences, and so it's just so relatable. And to see the growth that they had in this space, and then to know that that growth just stopped is very moving, very heavy, and you can still see that there today as well. Is there anything else that we wanted to add?
There's some questions. So Linda's asking, was there any discussion regarding the appropriateness of Fritz Peffer sharing a room with Anne? Nothing is said about it in the book, but why didn't Peter and Fritz share?
You know, that's such a good question that comes up all the time, especially young people. They want to know, like, why was this old man living with this young girl, right? It's such a strange idea. And one thing that I have just had to come to terms with is that there were no good options, right? They had planned for 7 people, and now all of a sudden they were having to accommodate 8, and they were literally hiding for their lives. And so no matter what decision they made, it was going to be problematic in some way for someone. And so they had to make the best decision that they could think of in that moment. And Anne was very much viewed as a little girl. And so Margo, on the other hand, was a few years older. And so she was seen as more developed and older and mature, and whereas Anne was viewed as this child. And you see that in the diary, right? You see that she's frustrated because everyone thinks of her as a little kid. And then later, after their interviews with Otto, where he shares even that when he read the diary, he learns how much more mature and wise his daughter was that he didn't even know. And so I think that was a part of the reason too. They thought that she was a little girl, and so they didn't see it as inappropriate in the same way that we might look at it, because we're looking at it through a lens of someone who has read the diary and knows how mature she was, right? To them, she was just a little girl. And so that's part of it. Aaron, would you add anything to that?
Nope.
Maybe Miep Gies told me that Peter got a room of his own because there were rats in his room. You know, not mice, but rats. And so they felt he could live up with that more easily than one of the girls. So
yeah,
that factored in.
With rats either.
No. So he had a room of his own as the only one, because they thought he was a big boy, let's say. And he could deal with it. But you're right, there were no easy options. And there was another comment that the hiding place was fairly small, or fairly large compared to many others. That's true too. I mean, we now do a study of all the hiding places in Europe. and it's exceptional in the size, but also the fact that the family could stay together, because in many cases the families had to be split up. And so in that sense, the Secret Annex is perhaps not representative. There were other spaces, cellars, people surviving in the woods, in a hole in the ground. Very, very dilapidated buildings, very scary. So in terms of hiding place, the Secret Annex was relatively speaking safe and spacious.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks, Jan Eric. So Aaron, I'm going to pass it off to you to go to the next room.
Morgan, there's a few questions. Do you mind if I ask you quickly?
Totally.
Sure.
So one of them, Carol, is asking, where is the furniture now? So you said the furniture is not there anymore. Where is it?
Basically, we don't know where it is, because after the people in hiding were discovered and arrested, also 2 of the helpers were arrested. Miepgies and Bert Voskuil actually collected Anne Frank's writings, her diary and her notes. But a moving company came and stole the furniture. But this is what happened back then. So a real company came in, took the furniture, was in a hiding place for Jews, and we don't know what happened to it. I mean, at that time already, German cities were being bombed already on regular basis. So we assume that lots of this furniture was taken to Germany and used elsewhere, but it was definitely stolen from the Secret Annex, and it never showed up again.
Okay, and
we tried to find the records of that company. The name was Puls, P-U-L-S. They were specialized in stealing furniture and belongings from Jews. And I befriended the grandson of the owner of that company. His name was also Puls, Jacob Puls. And I asked him whether there were any records of the family's company. And so you could perhaps trace where, based on dates and sales records, so we could perhaps locate the furniture. Also because parts of the diary were taken by Miep and Ellie, the helpers, but parts were not. So we were very keen to perhaps locate the furniture and find out more manuscripts. But in the end, we didn't. The Pulse company had no records left. And so we have no idea where it was. And like Aaron said, in August 44, a lot of German cities were carpet bombed. So a lot of houses were destroyed, and people who were relocated, who survived these bombings, needed furniture. So there was an active, a lot of lorries went from the Netherlands and other occupied countries with stolen Jewish property back to Germany, so that German families could have furniture.
Okay, thank you, Jan Eric. Are there any more questions about the first room we visited, or?
There is one more. Yep. Michael is asking, where was Margo's bed placed in that room?
As far as I know, Margo's bed was on the right-hand side. So if you go in on the right-hand side.
Yes.
Any other questions?
Yes, it's replica furniture. That's a question.
Oh,
it's a good question. It's not an ignorant question. It's a good
thing
question.
is, because I can't see the chat right now, actually, this is a virtual reality environment, meaning that this is not actually there. These are furniture rendered in the computer. So we know that the furniture looked like this. Otto, Frank, and Miepgies told us a lot about it. But we also know it from Anne Frank's diary. She was, very detailed in describing the actual hiding place. So this is why we know what it actually looks like. If we go to the next room, we will actually also see images on the wall. So they were the actual images that are in Anne Frank's room right now, they were scanned basically, and then entered in this VR rendering of the hiding place. If you ever have a chance to check out the website of the Anne Frank house, there's also kind of like a making of to show you how does this work nowadays to create a replica, what it once used to look like. So if you want to go in there, you could actually wear your VR goggles, download an app, and it really feels like you're in the hiding place, but you better sit down because it tends to make you feel dizzy. Any more questions?
No, that's all for now.
All right. Okay. Now the next room. This is obviously the room that
People
Anne
watching the
shared.
Anne Frank thing. There are only 3 people that haven't read the book. Shit.
So this room is actually Anne's room and Fritz Pfeffer's room. And what we see in here are these already iconic images that Anne Frank put up all over the wall. And so Mary was talking about the wallpaper that is very special, and you actually see the color up here of the wallpaper. So the Durban Centre in its exhibition has a replica of the wallpaper from the Anne Frank house. You'll also find Anne Frank's diary lying here. You know, the magazines, cinema, and theater. This is where she got most of her images from. Then over here, binoculars. Now, what would she use binoculars for? Well, at night, when lights had to be dimmed and then turned off, basically, Anne was watching her neighbors, and she was writing about her neighbors in the diary, telling how, you know, interesting their lives actually are. So she was very, very curious about everything that happened around her. This here is actually the dentist drill that Mr. Fritz Pfeffer brought in. And then something, you know, that you can see here is, sorry for that, there's one chair here in front of the desk, and there was always a fight about the desk. Now, Fritz Pfeffer wanted to use the desk to study, and Frank wanted to use the desk to write in her diary. So they had lots of arguments. But there's another chair over here, and actually the bed Anne Frank was sleeping in was rather short. So she put a chair at the end of her bed to make sure that she had enough leg room for her bed. Now, I just want to go back to one of the images, or both the images actually, that Morgan showed before, and those were the images of Anne Frank and her sister Margo, the amount they grew in that time in hiding, which is a very, very personal, intimate kind of like collection of what has happened exactly in that room. And you might also get this when you take your learners through the exhibitions. Learners, you know, if you tell them that there were 6 million innocent men, women, and children murdered because they were Jewish, what is 6 million? What does that number do for them? You know, how can they imagine this? But if you talk about that one of these people, each and one of them, of those people who were murdered, had a life, had a personality, had hobbies, had feelings, had hopes, you know, you kind of like take the telescopic view on the Holocaust to a microscopic view of the Holocaust. And there's this Dutch writer and lawyer, Abel Herzberg, who once said, you know, not 6 million Jews were murdered, 1 Jew was murdered 6 million times over. And this is something that we very often get in our workshops. I'd like to point out one more fact about those images. So these images did not just remain there for the entire time, but sometimes Anne Frank also thought, just like she did with the diary, hey, maybe I was childish back then. So she wrote new parts in her diary. She took parts that she wrote a year before and changed it and rewrote it. And she did the same thing with some of the images. And I will play a video for you just to give you an idea of what she did.
To brighten up her dull room in their hiding place, Anne stuck pictures and postcards on the walls.
That makes it look a lot more cheerful.
Near her little table, she put pictures of the British princesses Elizabeth and Margaret and of members of the Dutch royal family. Anne loved kings and queens and spent hours charting royal family trees. And she also pasted up satirical cartoons, pictures of landscapes and children, and film stars such as the Swedish actress Greta Garbo and the American Ginger Rogers. Many of the photos came from the Dutch women's magazine, The Bella. Anne loved movies. One of the helpers, Victor Kugler, gave her cinema magazines, which she combed through cover to cover.
Beth, who usually spends her days off with her boyfriend in the movie theatre, tells me the name of the film they have in mind on Saturday, and I rattle off to her both the names of the lead characters and the reviews the film has received.
Anne spent a lot of time on her picture collection, but as she got older, her interests changed. She covered up a photo of the American actresses Rosemary and Priscilla Lane with a picture of a sculpture by the Italian artist Michelangelo, and she pasted a Leonardo da Vinci self-portrait over a childish print. Anne was becoming increasingly interested in art. On the 8th of May 1944, she wrote in her diary,
I would love to go to Paris for a year and London for a year to learn the language and study art history.
It was visible on the wall.
Okay. Now I'll stop sharing my screen now. I have a question for you. And please feel free to respond either in the chat function or just raise your hand and we'll turn on your microphone. What makes Anne Frank so special? What do you think? And this is also a question we ask our guides in the workshop. If you do have any comments, please raise your hand. We'll unmute you.
I see her.
Mary. Yeah, can I jump in? I think maybe the fact that we have such an intimate insight into who she was in the diary. As you know, there are thousands of diaries and personal artifacts and poetry and art and so on of so many survivors. But her story and the personal insights that she shares in the diary resonate so deeply with so many, and the fact that the house is still there. I think it's kind of combination maybe of a few factors, that the possibility of reimagining or recreating the drama of one particular story, because we all know about the promise, the exhibition that we've had in South Africa, and the magnificent art and poetry of Eva Schloss's brother Heinz Gehringer. And why isn't Heinz featured in receiving so much? You know, the legend is that after the Bible, the Anne Frank Diary is the most read book globally. And I'd be interested to know what Jan Erik and you and Morgan think about that phenomenon. Why does Anne Frank occupy the hearts and minds of, if anybody knows a tiny bit about anything to do with the Holocaust, they'll talk about Anne Frank. And I'm interested in that phenomenon particularly.
I'm really sorry. I don't have a hands up thing. Can I just say something?
Sure, definitely. Please go ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Linda.
Hi. So I'm Linda Hackner from the Cape Town Holocaust Centre. And I'm actually working with a group of young South African children on the Anne Frank Diary now. We're doing for the Anne Frank House, actually, with anyway, I won't go into that now, but I've read the book. I just finished reading the book again. I mean, I read it when I was a kid, and I've just finished reading it again, and I find Anne hilariously funny. She's got such a sharp mind and a sharp tongue, and I think that you know, I've read other diaries, but Anne, you can imagine sitting down and having a really good conversation with this person, despite the fact that at times you want to give her a clap across her face and say, stop being such a moody teenager. Beyond that, she's just a remarkable human being. She would have been the most awesome journalist, I think.
Exactly. I mean, what you just said, you know, definitely, that's actually it. And there's so many other things, you know, the quality of her writing, you learn so much about her. You know, I once got the opportunity to sit down with Ahmed Katrada, and he told us how inspiring her words were, you know, while being in prison, basically. So, but besides all of her talent and the symbol of hope that she is, what also makes her really, really relatable, and this is also what we talk about in our workshops, is that she also is so normal in a way that she's not the perfect daughter, you know, the way that she writes about her, you know, friends at school, you know, she describes them and you know, calls them names maybe, you know, or the way she writes about her mother. She's not perfect at all, you know. Sometimes you would say even a little bit mean, but what we need to understand is, hey, this was Kitty, this was her best friend. She confided everything to her. And this makes it so, you know, relatable. If you lie to your best friend, you know, what's the point of having an honest conversation? And we also have those flaws. And because she never said, hey, I'm the perfect person, and because we know she was not, you know, this also plays a role in why, you know, Anne Frank is so relatable for so many young people, but also elderly people all over the world, still is nowadays. So this is exactly what we hear a lot. So thank you very much for all your comments.
It's definitely a fun conversation to have with students as well, because when you ask a question like, why is Anne so famous or so relatable or important or whatever, there's not one right answer. We all have our thoughts about why this is the case because of why she matters to us and our relationship with learning about her and this history. And so I feel like every time we work with students, I get to learn something new, because if a student says, this is why she's important to me, I can't tell them they're wrong, of course. That's very valid and very real. And so, you know, everyone has this way of connecting with her in that way. And so it's a really interesting conversation to get to have with students and see the way that their minds connect to her and to this story as well.
Sorry, me again. I would like to suggest that of the, I don't know how many, 95% people who polled that they'd read the book, if you read it more than 20 years ago, I would recommend that you read it again from your today's perspective. And also in the time of COVID, it's a really worthwhile read to revisit as an adult rather than as a teenager reading the book. So, yeah.
Yes, you're totally right. You know, the last time I read it was when I was already father to 2 sons. And the last time before that time was when I had no kids. So, you know, it's just as you get older in life, maybe you start to see things differently, and other different things suddenly start to make sense, you know, and you kind of like understand what she meant, maybe, you know. Okay.
From a very old person perspective, I'm 65 years old. I reread the diary a few months ago, and I was struck by the first paragraph of the diary, and basically she starts saying that she promoted the diary to be her best friend, because she says in so many words she has no friends. And you can say it's teenage exaggeration, but I think she started the diary with the intent of being honest. And it's very unusual to start a book saying, I have no friends, but this is what she did. And I think if you follow the diary in the course of 2.5 years, you start to understand it better. She was not lonely in the sense that she didn't have people around her, but she felt people didn't listen to her, didn't appreciate her. And I think that's also a reason why a lot of young people can connect to the Diary of Anne Frank. They have that feeling too. They feel not understood or not listened to. And I think that could also be a beginning of education. So adding to that, I work in the museum now after having worked for the Anne Frank House for 38 years. I never worked in the museum. And I now find the Anne Frank story gets a new audience because suddenly we have people from the Netherlands in the museum. Until now, until Corona, mainly international tourists visit the Anne Frank House. And suddenly the percentage of Dutch people visiting us went from 6-7 to 90%. And the typical visitor we now see is mothers with young daughters. And it's fascinating to see what Corona has done to our museum. And suddenly we are in touch with the audience that can read the Diary of Anne Frank in the original language. It's and I think 21st century mothers now invest the story with a new meaning. So after having worked there for so many years, I see suddenly a new series of questions asked, a new relevance. And I think maybe that's a reason why the diary is so important too, that over the years, the relevance of it changes.
Speaking of that, there are a few comments here in the chat box that I'll share. I know everyone can't always see all of them. Maura said, Anne is so relevant today. If we take our current situation with the world under lockdown, Anne Frank, excuse me, Anne Frank stands as a beacon of light. She's your typical teenager with a changing and maturing mind and spirit. It's her strength that we connect with and take strength from that. It's really beautiful. Heather says that she was still able to dream and use her imagination so vividly. I agree. I think that's also something that's special about her being so young that I don't think as an adult you would have had that same level of that quality as much. And then someone also said the point of view of a teenager is so important, and that's so true. This is such a good educational tool. The conversations we get to have with young people, starting from a place of Anne Frank, we get to talk about discrimination and prejudice, even their own experiences. Kids will share with us and then with others. And so we're really able to engage in important conversations that kids so desperately need to have on the one hand, but also learn how to have, right? It's hard to talk about those kinds of hard conversations. And so we're able to give them a space to do that and to practice so that hopefully when they leave our projects, they're able to do that even more in the world around them, which we so desperately need.
I see a beautiful question in the chat room. Why has the diary not been translated into all South African languages yet? I think one of the most inspiring events of last year was the diary being translated in Maori, so in New Zealand. A former member of the Dutch resistance, 97 years old, he sponsored the translation of the Diary of Anne Frank in Maori. And of course, I cannot read that language, but according to experts, it's a beautiful addition to the translation. And I think there are 9 languages in South Africa, aside from Afrikaans and English. The Afrikaans translation being beautiful too. But maybe we can find ways to make that happen, to translate it into more languages.
All right.
Hey, somebody is making it happen. Carol, can you elaborate? Carol Wengrove?
Well, in the meantime, let us know, Carol. But in the meantime, I'll take us into the next room.
Yes.
So, very important room. Here we have the bathroom. I will give you a quick look around. Now, Jan Erik made a really important point earlier, that the hiding place in a lot of ways, they were very fortunate to have this space. And in saying that, of course, we also acknowledge that being trapped in any space for 2 years is going to be challenging in a way that we can't even really understand and describe if we haven't experienced something like that. So we recognize that is true. It was incredibly difficult and challenging for so many reasons. And at the same time, we recognize that they were fortunate to have this space. And so it's kind of strange to try to hold those two truths at the same time, but it's just the reality. It's just what was. And what Jan Erik mentioned earlier, some people were hiding in holes in the ground in fields or in barns, and not protected from the elements and the snow and the rain and all of these places, the heat. And so for them to have a roof over their heads was special, for them to have a place to close the door and use the restroom, even if it was, they had to monitor when they had to time using the bathroom as to not cause suspicion to people who were working beneath them who didn't know they were there, right? If people are working in a warehouse below and they keep hearing water running all day long from toilets flushing, they're thinking, hold on, there's only supposed to be a few people up there working in the offices. Why are they all going to the bathroom all day long, right? And then they might start to suspect something. So they had to time when they used the restroom. And so even though that is the case, like Jan Erik pointed out, Anne mentions in the diary that she's so thankful for what they have. But more so than the space they had is the fact that they were able to be together. That was truly the thing that that was very, very unique from so many families who went into hiding, where parents had to, send children away and have no idea what would come of them, if they would ever see them or hear from them again. So the fact that they were all able to be together makes this space even more of a fabulous hiding place. At one point, and refers to it as the Taj Mahal of hiding places, right? Because they were so fortunate, but that doesn't mean it was easy to be in hiding, of course. Another reason that this room matters when you think about the story of Anne is you think about how old she was. She was, only 13, 14, 15 years old. And as a young girl, those are such precious years. Those are hard years just to be a girl, to be a boy at that age too, but much less to not have the kind of privacy that you might, have had at home, where you can go in your room and slam the door and be mad at your parents. And, she was at an age that her body was changing. And so there was a lot of heightened sense of herself, sense of her privacy, sense of her body, and all of these kinds of things that make this a room that is important to Anne and important to her story as well. So I think I may have seen a couple of comments coming in. I can't see them from sharing my screen. But let's hop and see what's going on out here. Oh, Carol is responding about...
Carol's gonna do the translations.
Beautiful. All right, yeah, Jan Erik, he's on it. Can't wait to hear more about that. When I come to South Africa, I will have to see that in person. All right, so I'm looking at time. So if we don't have any specific questions about the bathroom, I will just go ahead and pass it off to Aaron and let him take us upstairs.
Okay, now we are actually in the largest room of the Secret Annex, which was the Van Pelses, Herman and Augusta Van Pelses' bedroom at night. But obviously you can also see the table and the 8 chairs around the table, the stove, some dishes. So this was also the kitchen for the people in hiding, where they had their meals, where they would come together, sit together in this very particular room. One special thing about this room is that, you know, people in hiding would also celebrate Jewish holidays, anniversaries, you know, of time spent in hiding. The helpless would actually come in and celebrate together with the people in hiding. So that was very special. And at times, for instance, one of the helpers is Bet Foskal. She was the youngest helper. And Anne Frank, being the youngest of the people in hiding, had kind of like a special connection, you know, a special relationship to Bep Foskal. And at one point, Anne also asked Bep if she would like to spend one night in the Secret Annex together with Anne and the other people in hiding, and Bep actually did that. So for Anne, it was her home, it became her home. For Bep, it was really strange, and she reported that she could not actually close an eye during that night. Now, what we also have in here is this one personal item here of Peter Van Pel's. Now, when he turned 16, this was his first birthday in the Secret Annex, he got this stock exchange game, like an early version of Monopoly, but this one deals with equities of the Dutch. So it's a board game, and the original is actually still there, but this is his personal one, which we actually will see in a second in Peter Van Pel's room. But the thing that I would like to talk about in here is actually the role of the helpless. And this is also something that we come across a lot, and that we actually start this conversation with our learners in our workshops and seminars. So obviously, the people in hiding could not leave the hiding place. They had to have people to help them, to bring them food, groceries, meats, vegetables, everything had to be organized. Now, obviously, all of these helpers, 6 of them, were friends of the Frank family. But I would like to put out this question to you now. If you were to help people in hiding, what are kind of like the negative aspects that you got to deal with when considering helping people who are in hiding? And you could actually use the chat function if you would like to, but you could also just share your comments. So what are the negative aspects of helping? What do you need to consider? What goes on in your mind when you help?
Well, I think you certainly put your own family at risk. And I think that's the major one, that you are, it's all very well for you to take on the role of helper, but your family is going to suffer, because that was the nature of the style of punishment that the Nazis had. Yeah, so that's it. Exactly. And it's not only your families. When you go to the grocer, they're wondering why you're buying so many potatoes, or should you be buying so many, you know, there's all those things. You're constantly living a lie, I suppose. That must have been really hard.
Exactly, yeah. And we must not forget from the time onwards that Anne Frank and the family went into hiding, they were criminals, yeah, under the law back then. So when you helped people in hiding, you were actually helping criminals.
My wife, who is a historian, this is Jan Erik speaking, interviewed people who helped and people who were asked to help but refused to. And to sum up a large body of research, the interesting bit is that both felt they had no choice. And the people who refused to help said, you know, I'm afraid for my family, the consequences are too dire. You know, I had no choice. I had to refuse to help. But the ones who helped basically said the same. They said the minute they were confronted with the question, they right away decided to help, as if their whole upbringing sort of forced them to make that choice. irrespective of the consequences. So I told her after this long research, you know, your research doesn't help much because you know there's no two kinds of people, and it's interesting because I think the same would apply for today. As some people have this helper's disease almost, you know, when forced with such a choice, they jump into it, not thinking about the consequences. And in other cases, people have very good reasons not to help. My thought would be that education could be a large role in preparing people for helping and thinking it through without losing that almost how to put it, sovereign feel of the helpers. Miep knew the consequences. Her husband was in the resistance, but yet she didn't, you know, hesitate a moment. And the same goes for Ellie. So it's a fascinating topic. Why do people help and others don't?
Jan Erik,
Yeah.
I see a comment here. Maybe you or Aaron want to speak to on that same note from Karen. It says, I recently read that Miep felt that she would have such great remorse that would haunt her throughout her life if she didn't help. Can you comment about this, please?
Well, yes, and this goes back to this activity, and I will answer your question in a second. Now, when we do this activity with our learners, we, you know, create this list. What are the negative things about helping? And they, you know, come up with, well, you know, it's time consuming. You put your family at risk. You have to have the money or the means to organize everything, you know. And then we also ask the same thing. What are the positive aspects of helping?
Mm-hmm.
And you know, actually, every time you can combine all the positive things about helping to one word, you know, one term, which is humanity. So Miep and all the other helpers, they did not hesitate, you know. For them, it was the one and only right thing to do. And this is why they helped. Miep said, they were my friends. They needed help, and I could help. So of course I would help. And if you watch interviews with Miep, you know, she really thinks, you know, that, you know, she does not want to be a hero. She doesn't see herself like a hero. For her, it's the most normal thing to do, to help those people in need. But she feels that, you know, she did actually help them. And with her, you know, kind of like compassion with all her energy that she put in, you know, Otto Frank survived. And, you know, when we hear how Anne Frank writes about her, you know, you really see this character of Miep and the other people who were helping. So Miep was very special. And right, I think she would have had that remorse, but I don't think that she did, because she did an awful lot.
I traveled quite a bit with Miep when she was still visiting the United States and Germany and other countries. And there was a public Miep who was admired and who was, you know, given the floor to speak about her memory. And then there was, after these often very well visited events, there was the private Miep. And let's say the public Miep look back at the history positive, but privately she always told me she felt she hadn't done enough. And she said, I'm not a hero because I didn't save anybody. I tried to, yes, but I failed. So there was a deep sense of failure. And you'll find the same with a lot of people who helped Jews that I know of. They always recollect the one moment that they felt they didn't do enough. The one time they said, I'm too busy, or the one time they said, I could have done more. And so, ironically, a lot of helpers feel guilty for not having done enough. And a lot of people who refuse to help don't feel guilty. And they have all these reasons not to. So it's not as simple as that helpers can look back without remorse, and people who refuse to help feel guilty. It's more complex, and I think we should educate about it. We should tell youngsters that to be a helper doesn't sort of make the rest of your life positive. It's more complex than that.
Can I just suggest something? Because Tali has a very, very important question, and I think looking at the time, I think we should actually use this time for discussion. So Claudia, if it's okay, I would just briefly look around, have a look around in this room, which is Peter's room, and briefly up in the attic, and then we can talk. Shall we do that?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. So Peter Van Pels's room, who was the only one of the people in hiding, and then finally the actual attic, which was the place where Anne and Peter first kissed, but it was not a room for the people in hiding. You know, it was not insulated. There were rats up there. Maybe this is also the reason why the rats got down to Peter's room. Food was kept up there, you know, it was used for storage room. And out here, actually, this window that Anne Frank used to look out, you know, breathe in fresh air with the chestnut tree coming from out there. Morgan, anything you would like to add before I ask Tali?
No, I don't think so. Let's use our time for discussion.
Perfect.
Great. So I think that it's wonderful to, you know, to speak in general terms about those wonderful people that saved lives and did everything. We're living in a country with food security crisis, with people starving that don't have food in the time of Corona. Are we asking those questions? Are we helping? Are these questions coming to normal people that have food? So for me, I would like us to discuss, not in time of genocide, but in times of crisis, normal times, when we speak to our learners, to our educators, and so on. How can we make a connection, you know, without cheapening, of course, the story of genocide? Of course, that's not what we are trying to do, but to make it relevant. And as Jan-Erik, you said about education, can we do ethical education or moral education that immediately the connection will be, sure, I must make sandwiches. I absolutely have to, you know, collect, I don't know, tinned food and drop in a collection point because, of course, I have to help. So for me, that is worth a little bit of a discussion, I think. Specifically here in South Africa.
I think generally, you know, speaking, I'll just say this first and then maybe pass it over to people who live in your country who can speak to that, of course, more than I could. But just broadly speaking, in regards to the question, I would say that the projects that we do have that as one of the many pieces of goals of the projects that we're doing, is that kids will see their role in their communities. And again, we want to stay away from drawing any sort of, you know, casual comparisons, of course, but there is a place to recognize that I'm a human living in my neighborhood today at this time. What is going on and what can my role be in that? And one of the most powerful things I think about this history and the projects that all of us as educators get to do around this topic is that they focus on the history and they see the themes, and hopefully they see the lessons. We make sure they see the lessons, and then they slowly start to take steps, right? And say, okay, well, the theme of discrimination and prejudice, you know, that still exists. That didn't go away. That's not a part of just the history. It's a part of the today. And so what does that mean for us? And so when we do the activity that Aaron was describing, all about helping, that's really what the conversation boils down to at the end, right? We start saying, why would they have helped? And then the language kind of transitions a little bit and becomes, why do we help? Why do we not? Why might we not? Why might we? Right? And so then they start to really think about consciously, because all of us, I think, subconsciously have these thoughts, right? We subconsciously are aware of our position on helping or not, and if we step back. But bringing it to the consciousness, I think, is an important piece of that, so that they can then step into some action. So broadly speaking, I love it. I think it's spot on with what we do. And then I will stop talking and pass it over to some people across an ocean.
What I would like to, sorry, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just think that that is actually our role, to talk about Anna Frank as a sort of, I'm using inverted commas because I don't have a camera so you can't see my hands, as a historical figure, and to look at the helpers, etc., and have it out there is not, it makes no sense. We've got to bring it down to our own lives, our own communities, our own situations, and draw sort of help and lessons from that, and talk about our own countries and what's going on in them. And there are people from all over the world here. I don't think in any single country can we sort of sit back and say, well, we've got it taped, we've got it all sorted out. And so Anna Frank and other histories around the Holocaust are really the way into talking about our own, I believe.
Well, and you're totally right, Linda. And what I would like to add, and this is what we are trying to do in education, we want our learners, to understand that the Holocaust did not just happen. It was committed actively, actively. And there were all these steps leading towards it. At the same time, there are all these steps that young people can also take, in order not to, in a positive sense. So I would like to refer to the 2015 so-called refugee crisis we had in Europe, when we had hundreds of thousands coming through Austria, going to Germany. Well, they came through Europe. And so many people just went out there to help because they could. There were people who needed help. This is why they helped. And when I talk to my students, to my learners who were trained as Anne Frank guides, they said, well, we felt inspired by Mipris. This is actually what she did. So everybody can contribute a little bit. And this is something that we really need to emphasize on in our workshops. And I know that this is actually what we are doing in education.
I think the powerful thing for kids to take away is that in the end, it's not the politicians. Anne Frank says it herself. It's the ordinary people who make things happen or not. Mm-hmm. I think one of her quotes was, it's the ordinary people in the street who can make the changes. And that's what hopefully these programs work to do in young learners' minds.
There's a comment here in the chat that maybe feeds into this discussion. Deborah said she finds it incredible. It's easy to start the process of helping people, but it can become hard over time to sustain this. And they were in hiding for a long time. So the helpers had to sustain those efforts over a long time. And how do we sustain helping? Maybe we can bring that into the discussion.
I think that's a really, really, really important point. And I don't know how one does. I mean, it's in terms of our situation here in South Africa, I don't know how one sustains it. I don't know if anyone's got any ideas, but it's a really good point.
Are there any, is there anything that we know about the helpers and why they continue to help over the years? Is there any information? Do we have any, Erin and Morgan?
Well, this is what we do know, that as soon as they were asked, the helpers said yes. These became acquainted to the Frank family through different ways, But for instance, Beb Voskuil, her father, he worked in the warehouse, and at one point it became important, they needed more help. And Beb Voskuil's father, he was the same, just as Beb. He also said immediately, that he would help. And actually only the office employees knew that there were people in hiding. So this one man, Beb Voskow's father, was actually in the warehouse, who also knew what was going on. And they did so until the end of until August 44, when the place was actually raided, and when Victor Kugler and Joe Kleinman, two of the helpers, were actually arrested. So really until the end.
So then the question.
Maybe to add to that, sorry, we are now doing research into as many hiding histories as we can find. First in the Netherlands, but we are connected with researchers all over Europe. And the first facts, the first patterns we find is that helpers tended to be young, tended to be female, and tended to be not political, with a big P. So they were not part of political parties or movements. And after the war, the stories of the helpers were pushed aside very quickly, maybe because they were young women. And so if you look at the statistics in the Netherlands, 16,000 Jews survived in hiding. And already we've collected the histories for about half of those survivor stories. A lot of the helping was done by teenagers or adolescents, young women. They organized the finding shelter. They brought babies, toddlers, young Jewish kids all over the country. And after 1945, a lot of them pursued a career in sort of helping type professions. And so they became pediatricians or medical doctors or teachers. So they didn't stop helping, except, you know, they made it a sort of professional career. And what struck me most in doing this research is how little we know. We know very little about who helped and why. And this is not just a phenomenon in the Netherlands. We know a lot about the perpetrators. We know a lot about the victims. We know very little about who helped and why. And that in itself is interesting, I find.
I'm wondering if knowing the person that you help helps to sustain the help. It's not so easy to turn away after a little while if you know the person that you're helping. That's in response to Deborah's.
Well, I think another piece of that too is that they saw the consequences of what would happen if they stopped. Once you start feeding someone, if you know you're the only person feeding them, you know, you can't just easily not do that and not know what would happen. So I would imagine they knew the consequences. And so that was very motivating. And, you know, one thing, I think the piece about being sustainable is important. I think equally as important too is about how to get people to the place of helping to begin with. And one thing that I've learned is that there's some muscle memory that has to be developed here. And so someone who has never been generous and never, you know, helped someone in any capacity is going to be very unlikely to then turn around and help in such a dramatic way, right? And so I think that's one connection we can have for our students. Again, not to make a irresponsible comparison, but to say, if you want to be the kind of person one day that's going to help somebody when it really matters, you have to be the kind of person that helps today in some way, in whatever you can. So maybe that's making the sandwiches, or maybe that's doing the food drive, or maybe that's doing whatever, because you can't not practice something. And then when it gets hard, expect that you're going to have the muscle to do it, right? It's going to be a gradual thing. And so I think that's an important way we can connect with kids in this story as well, because we all want to think we would have been the meat piece. We all want to think we would say yes. Every kid says, of course I would help. Of course I would. And we don't know. That's the truth of the matter. So we don't know what you would do then, but you know what you do now. And so what you do now and today is a good indication of what you would do when the consequences are even more.
I think
Very
that's
good point.
So true that it's a muscle, and you've got to practice it. Are there any other questions? We've only got a few minutes left. If anyone else has a question.
Otherwise, I've been left with the privilege of saying thank you. First of all, to everybody for attending what I thought was just an inspiring afternoon. So much, and just the details, the personal, intimate details of the life of the Frank family. And, you know, as I say, we have this beautiful space in our own exhibition detailing so much about the Anne Frank story, and yet I learned so much today. Thank you so much for that content, and very much thank you for stimulating the conversation about how important our role as citizens is today. And even if it's not about helping in this time of crisis, what I'm consumed with every day is how we motivate active citizenry in wearing masks, in protecting each other in this time of crisis in South Africa. We've kind of ended lockdown and we found ourselves in a space where whenever we venture out, people have come to the decision, it appears, that it's all behind us. And nothing could be further from the truth. So for me, it's about working together in small steps, taking responsibility, finding solidarity with each other and as a country in supporting, because wearing a mask, you're protecting the people you walk past, not only yourself. So in tiny steps, we need to think about every day the choices that we have and the choices that we make. And we're privileged to be in this work at the Holocaust Centre or Holocaust Genocide Centres across the country, inspiring young people every day to make positive choices. What a stimulating afternoon. Thank you so, so much to Jan Erik, to Morgan, to Aaron. Myra sent me a message to say she had to leave and she sends her apologies. And I want to say that I'm sure I speak for everybody in saying we've thoroughly enjoyed it and learned so much and look forward to next time. And to the translation, Carol, thank you so much.
And wonderful. And let me add that I speak on behalf of Aaron that for the Anne Frank House, working with you in South Africa was one of the most inspiring and memorable experiences ever. And we've worked in many countries, so really, we remember you so fondly. And I hope next year we can hook up again and kidnap Morgan from South Carolina to South Africa.
That sounds perfect.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you so much. Thank you, Joy, for joining us. And thank you, Claudia, for all your hard work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.